Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I am Paddocast, and I made Ahri my entire personality at the Houston Regionals this last weekend. It's the deck that I brought. I was half a game short of the best of Ahri, and it's a deck that I really think could do really well in this meta and could have made top cut, especially if I was a better player and better prepped. I'll get into some of those moments as we dive into the deck. I also got to catch up after the tournament with Caleb, who did win the best of Ahri, and talk shop about the very similar ideas we had about executing the deck and then where we diverge. So I'll dive into all that and more. But first, please like and subscribe on this video to support me. I'm a brand new channel. And if you have any questions about Ahri or other content that you would like to see, leave it down in the comments below. But without further ado, let's get into it. Now, Ahri is a deck that I really like because I think that Calm and Mind are really strong domains, and it gives you access to a lot of good closers, counter spells, combat tricks, all these different tools you can use to outplay your opponents, and it has access to a lot of card advantage. So it is both a fun deck to pilot. It can play very defensively naturally with the Ahri Legend ability, but it also can play aggressively in certain situations and be the aggressor. And I just really enjoy playing this deck, and so I fell in love with it, and so that is why I chose it to bring it to Houston Regionals. I think it is a deck that can play well into the field, especially what we see topping at the event. And so without further ado, I'm going to dive into the deck. I'm going to talk about my thoughts, choices, have some anecdotes about things that happened while in the tournament in certain matchups, and hopefully transfers knowledge to you so you can play Ahri even better, maybe improve on what I'm doing. And I'll definitely be covering Ahri through all of the sets, even including into Spirit Forge and so forth, along with other content, of course. But without further ado, let's just dive into the deck off the rip. Now, runes, I went 6 and 6. There's a lot of people that are skewing 7-5, whatever. I never had a problem hitting a rune. I always had enough runes to cast whatever I want. I was never jammed on runes. I don't see a reason, based on what I'm running in the deck or even other heavier rune versions of decks, to run anything different. And so this is just what I have chosen to run, and it works. Now, diving into the Ahri Legend itself, the thing to know about Ahri is that it is -1 to each attacking unit. It's not one unit that's attacking in, it's every attacking unit. It is to a minimum of 1, so if they have a bunch of 1 might units, you're not going to get a lot of value out of it. We'll talk into that as we talk about battlefields, because there is a way that you can get advantage out of it. And I will tell you right now that especially in a deep tournament, as you get later in rounds, as people get mentally fatigued, as other players maybe haven't played a lot against Ahri, the Ahri math will get to certain players. Now, there are players that have the notepads that are mathing out on their notepads, doing their due diligence, but the Ahri math is disruptive, and I think that it leads to a lot of surprising matchups and problems, decisions that kind of weigh on your opponent over the course of a very long tournament. I think Houston Regional ended up being 13 or 14 hours of just gameplay, and people woke up earlier to get in line and stuff like that. So overall, it is a legend that has a little bit of advantage, even though it seems like a small thing. Now, for battlefields, starter battlefield, most of the time I run Dreaming Tree. Dreaming Tree is it's just a really good battlefield. It's one of the most powerful battlefields in Origins, in my opinion, and many top players' opinions. You'll see it in many top players' decks. If you can take advantage of this battlefield, you are in a good position. And basically it says first time you choose a friendly unit with a spell here each turn, draw 1. And so the cool part about this is any spell that also already draws you a card that targets, like stupefying your own unit, will draw you 2 cards. Discipline is an easy one that gives a unit +2 might and draws a card, but if you're targeting at Dreaming Tree, you'll draw 2 cards. And so hand advantage can stack up really fast. So usually this is a starting battlefield. However, there are a few exceptions, and the exception is going to be Treferian Warcamp, which sometimes I will just start Treferian Warcamp into the Kaisa matchup, into Annie matchup, into matchups that are going to use direct damage to take out your units. It is very good because it gives them +1 and makes them more resilient, means you need less buff spells and less other things to buff them up. The other thing it does is if you stack multiple units at it, you get the advantage of that, but they don't get the advantage because as they come in, they're going to lose the Treferian Warcamp buff. It also, like we talked about earlier, if a bunch of 1 might units come in, they would normally go to 2 might, but now they will go back down to 1 might when they come in against Ahri, which is again really good thing to have. So Treferian Warcamp is kind of tech for specifically that matchup. And then Grove of the Godwillow is just a whatever game you're going to play first, whether it's sometimes maybe it is the first game of the matchup, maybe it's going to be later on if you lose, whatever. Grove of the Godwillow is good for that. You're a very defensive minded deck, so you can go stack on it, draw cards as you're getting your hold points, and play the game out that way. But either way, card advantage is the name of the game. You have a lot of draw in the deck, and having more battlefields giving you more draw just gives you more ways to answer what your opponent wants to do. And it gets really frustrating, I'm sure, for the opponents of an Ahri deck. A little bit of what I witnessed this weekend. So now we're gonna talk about Ahri my champion unit, and I chose Ahri Alluring. Caleb, also best of, also chose Ahri Alluring, and we kind of had the same idea about it. And I'll explain why I start with Ahri Alluring. A lot of people have basically, content creators, other people have just said, hey, the consensus is that blue Ahri is the best Ahri, and you should play that, and it has other benefits of making sure that you have a turn one drop. Maybe if you miss on, you're going second or whatever, and you miss on something somehow. I'll tell you, I never missed a two drop, never missed a turn one play, and I do not want to de-ramp that fast. And so Ahri Inquisitive, the blue Ahri, while it's very good at giving negatives to opponents, it's really good in a lot of matchups. I have it in my sideboard to swap in. I think the thing that's missing beyond being fragile is that the Ahri Alluring helps you solve one of the main problems in Riftbound right now, which is how points are scored and the advantage of going first. When you go first, like, your advantage of winning is it's like 70-30, basically. It's not like a close advantage or a slight advantage, like not like 55-45, that's 60-40, it's 70-30. Statistically, in top table cuts, as we've seen some of the statistics. So the issue is that when you're going second, if they're going out and they're scoring points, if you're playing Annie, which was the championship deck, there were a bunch of them in the top 8, did really well at this tournament. The reason it's good is if Annie goes first, especially, if you start up a point, the thing about it is you're going to score a lot of points really quickly, and for your opponent to catch back up, if you're the second player, is you have to find ways to swing back points. And the first time you do that, you're really just going to kind of catch up, and then you're going to need to do it again to pull ahead and win. And so in a lot of cases, the way that I feel is that Ahri Alluring solves that problem, because if you get the hold, that double point bump for holding helps close that gap and helps solve that problem. The other thing that Ahri Alluring does that I think that a lot of people misunderstand when they're playing the deck, when they're playing Ahri Alluring, is that you're not always looking for it to go off. Yes, if you can get it to go off, if you strategically you can do that, great. But the other reason to play her is to make your opponent do something drastic, make them spend resources to get rid of the Ahri Alluring. So you might throw it down, know that they might be able to clear it, but how much are they gonna have to spend to do that? And what is that going to make them vulnerable to on the following turn? Because if I throw down Ahri Alluring and I have it pretty stacked, I have a good defensive hold, I have some combat tricks, you fight through all of that, and then the next time on the crackback, I take a unit and base at a watcher, and I hit your units that you didn't want to have sitting there. The Kaisas, the Dariuses that will really want to get in and pull out their units, but now that they're pot committing because they don't want you to get 2 points on that hold, now you're forcing them into situations, and you're dictating kind of where the game is going. And so I think that is a thing that is overlooked when you are considering Ahri Alluring. Is like, yes, it's a 5 energy, 1 power unit that's only 4, but I think that what it forces the game state to be is the power of the card, as well as getting you back into games and winning you games when you were going second. So I had a lot of success with Ahri Alluring. I love the card, and I think that I think there's an argument for why she is the best Ahri to play. Now, let's go into spells off the bat. We have Defy. Now, this spell is very strong. It allows you to counter any spell that costs 4 and 1 power. So it won't save you from Falling Star, but it will be really effective and gets a lot of value out of things like Void Seeker, especially against Annie. Like, that was the key thing that I would look for, because it prevents their draw. They spent 3 energy and a power to get it out, and it'll punish them. It's a good power trade. In that instance, it also, in mirrors against other calm decks or with combat tricks, being able to defy it is also a good way to kind of win that back and forth, surprise your opponents, save a unit as it goes in, even if they're trying to Hexray. As long as it's not Kaisa, Defy usually always has really great value, especially if you time it at the right time. Again, you want to be mindful of how much you deramp yourself early, but it does get rid of opponents' answers that they think that they had to stop you from doing what you want to do on the battlefields. Now, I think the problem into Kaisa with Defy that you have to be aware of is that because she gets to pay the costs with her power, stopping with Defy, she's not losing that rune and you're losing that rune to Defy. So still can be really valuable, really clutch. Like if they have to tap out to play a Darius Trifarian and cleave, and you stop that cleave so the Darius doesn't get to go off, that's a huge play. Good Kaisa players will often have stuff open to still play around, and a lot of their spells are fairly cheap. So I think that it's not as good into Kaisa. Defy kind of is still, it's still a good card, but it can still win you some games. But because of that rune disadvantage that Kaisa naturally brings, it makes it difficult. Now, next up we have Stupefy. This card, bread and butter, amazing. It's great with Ravenbloom Student. It's effectively a +2. On Dreaming Tree, again, you can cast it on your own unit in order to draw 2 cards, because even though you're giving a minus, you'll get to draw the 2 cards. Very, very good for just for that. 1 to draw 2 cards is pretty crazy, considering, you know, there's a card in Spirit Forge. It's like 3 power, 2 energy to draw you 3. Like, and this card just like, yeah, I just do it. Pretty good value right there, as well, just being a good combat trick. You know, that 1 might a lot of times will get you over the line. On guard, I only run 2. So basically what I've kind of felt or found in a lot of my testing is that on guard on Dreaming Tree, great. You have to have a lot of solo units. There's a lot of scenarios where you will stack up to be defensive on certain battlefields, which means that on guard's only giving you 1. And at the point that on guard's only giving you 1, it's not quite as good of a card or as powerful a card. Again, sometimes 1 might get you over the line, but I felt like 2 has been pretty solid and good for me, especially using it as early game plays, like with Ravenbloom, to protect them as they go in or overtake. Next up, we have Retreat. This card is goated. You should run 3 in probably every Mind deck that exists, is pretty much my opinion. Basically, you can save your VIP units. You can boomerang Watchers, swing in with Watchers, take it out. They play a Watcher, something to come back at you. You just basically boomerang it back to your hand. There's a lot of good plays you can get off of Retreat, and it ramps you. And so ramp within the Ahri deck is a thing that is a big strength of it, because your opponent might think what your next turns are going to be, but then between Retreat and between Find Your Center, which we'll talk about in a little bit, you kind of end up in this scenario where your opponent is like, all right, well, they're not going to Watcher, and then all of a sudden you're Watchering, or all of a sudden you can now you can get to Time Warp, and it catches a lot of players off guard. And I think that it is very good on top of saving your units. Also, note, it is good against reflexive triggers. So anything like a Falling Star, if your opponent misplays, in my opinion, and they play a Falling Star to kill a solo unit that you have out there, and on cast you Retreat before they get to do their reflexive triggers, and they have units on the board, then they have to target their own units with the Falling Star. So this scenario actually happened in a very interesting way, where in game 1 of round 9, I was playing against a Kaisa player, and they Falling Star targeted 2 of my units. I actually double retreated, brought them back. The Falling Star double went into his Pouting Poro, and so a Kaisa player I'm going to get on the other side on my turn, like, that's a lot of power potentially, as long as you can back it up with draw. And so I think the Retreat is just a phenomenal card. Next up, we have Charm. I have 2 Charms main deck. The reason I do this, and you'll see there's a few spells, I think it's because players, what I have found, don't expect you to have these main deck, and it gives them even more strength. Charm is just a good spell, as long as there's a lot of situations where you can basically pick up units early that they don't expect, eliminate them from the battlefield, even big units, especially on watcher turns where you've given everything -3, kind of leaves them pretty helpless. The other thing you do with Charm is just get big units off of battlefields, unstack their holds, and go in and take the battlefield for themselves. There was a particular game where I was playing as the team up player, and they had a Mundo on one battlefield and like a pseudo stack on the other battlefield. They had another unit that I thought was a Tide Turner, and so basically I just charmed the Mundo over to that battlefield. He flips over Fight or Flight, sends his Mundo back to his base because he wants to re-attack, because he knows that I'm opening this battlefield to go in and end the game. And little did he know I had a second charm. I just charmed his Mundo back in there to give him the turns off, throw down Ahri Alluring, points ramp up, win the game that way. Like, there's a lot of creative things you can do with Charm. It's an amazing spell. Even if it's not bringing things into kill, you can just move their units around to disadvantageous positions. So very good card. Next up, we have Discipline. This is your, in my opinion, bread and butter combat trick. Gives you +2, draws you 1 on Dreaming Tree, draws you 2. Really great spell, great filtering card. We have Rune Prison. I have 1 Rune Prison main deck. I actually really like this card more and more that I played. I just decided that it should be a main deck card. Now, the catch with Rune Prison is again, you have to be careful with a lot of these powerful cards. You don't want to just be blowing them all early. You want to build them up for later game advantage and to take advantage, especially if you have any ramp or draw. But Rune Prison stuns a unit, so it deals with any big unit, and pretty much every deck has some big unit or finisher that you want to deal with. It answers Ride the Wind, it answers Mundo, it answers Watcher, it answers Dead Bloom Predator, any big unit that they have to spend their whole turn, they're trying to get value out of, and you can just say like, no, you get stunned, you bounce out of the combat that you hope to clear this battlefield with, and they lose that point in that tempo. Like, the card is just good. It's rare that you will not find a good use for Rune Prison unless you're completely getting blown out. And at that point, like, I mean, you're getting blown out. So I feel like Rune Prison is just really, really good. One in the deck. Funny enough, I wanted to have 2 in this list, but I lost one somehow between day 1 and day 2. I don't know what happened. And so as I was making my list for the day of, I had to shift it. And so I would probably have a second Rune Prison sideboard or in main deck. I don't know. But I would probably have a second one around just because I think the card is that good. Next up, we have Find Your Center. This is a ramp card. It costs 3. As an action, you draw 1 and channel 1 rune exhausted. However, if they are at 5 points or more, then it only costs you 1. This spell, actually, a lot of times I will leave up runes, and on my opponent's turn, if they don't like really force anything that I want to respond to with combat tricks or, you know, a wind wall, a defy, or something like that, in the combat, if they start a showdown, then I might cast Find Your Center during that, especially if I know that they've hit 5 on the next turn off of holding and they're gonna recapture a battlefield or something like that and try to go to 6, or any way that I know they're gonna kind of get to 5, so I can cast it for 1. I'll try to sneakily get that in there on their turn so that I get to use that rune on my turn when it comes back to me. And next up, we have Windwall. I think that this card deserves to be main deck. The look on my opponent's faces when I windwalled so many falling stars this tournament that folks thought game 1 were good. They were good to go, and it stopped them. It is a great protection against all the big spells that might come your way, like a Cathian Rain, like Time Warp, that will finish games, Grand Stratagem. There's just a lot of big spells that you're like, you know what, like, I don't want this to happen. This could ruin my day. Divine Judgment, you know, like, there's so many things where you're just like, no. Now, outside of Falling Star as a cheap spell, you usually never want to spend this on something that's really cheap because you're going to deramp 2 Calm Rooms in order to play this Windwall. But I think it is so valuable that, you know, if you get in your opening hand and there's not a really good value for it, you can recycle it early out of your hand and it's no big deal. But if you get it later, it's just like towards the end of the game, it'll be a spell that will win you games. And as we talk about the sideboard, we'll talk a little bit about that versus Mystic Reversal. Time Warp. There's a lot of people too that heading into this have just been banging the drum of Time Warp is overrated. But the reality is that you saw it this weekend. Time Warp just wins games. It won me multiple games this weekend at the regional. Everyone has to kind of play around it against you. It's a constant threat that's kind of looming, especially with Ahri Alluring that can get you 2 points. You can very easily get into a situation where if you're going to hold that one battlefield and go to 6 and you're going to have 10 runes, they have to know that you can go from 4 to 8 and just end the game instantly. So it creates a lot of pressure situations just by existing in your deck. And the reason I go 2 is because it's a card that if you run one of and you get in your opening hand, you don't want to have to be forced to basically like ball and chain lug that, you know, into the late game. I'd rather just recycle it and hit the other one in my deck later on, which pretty consistently happened. There was very rarely a time where I was like, man, I really wish I had Time Warp and I didn't draw it, and it wasn't in my hand. So I think that overall the 2 feels pretty good. Now, going back to the units, I have 8 2-drops. This is basically feels good for what you're going to do to get an early 2-drop. I never missed a 2-drop the entire event. Now, I won't say that I didn't mulligan and have to top deck a 2-drop once or twice, but I never actually did miss a 2-drop, which was very clutch in this game. And I think that 8 is the right number to have. Stalwart Poro, the reason we're playing this is just basically on defense, it's even stronger. 3 might, as you'll see in this deck, especially with Ahri's -1, means that you're trading straight up without any combat tricks into 4 might units like Kaisa Survivor that wants to come in. It just creates awkward situations. So getting to 3 might out of a 2-drop is really good, especially defensively. Ravenbloom Student, this card is a nightmare for most players. I talked about Ahri doing math. The math that you have to do expecting what might a Ravenbloom become as you attack into it is pretty insane, or it attack into you. It ate a ton of Void Seekers or other random spells that, you know, people wanted to try to remove it going into a battlefield, and I would just easily buff it up, draw a bunch of cards, and it would be perfectly fine. And you know, that's I think that Ravenbloom Students, just as of Origins, is one of the best 2 drops that's out there. Clockwork Keeper. Now this one, between this one and Lookout, is kind of what I've been waffling. I started with Lookouts, and I've kind of felt over time that Clockwork Keeper can still get you the draws later in the game, but at the same time, I think that Clockwork Keeper is also just, it's better to have the 2 power. You're not going to do the draw early, but it's just better to have the 2 power early to threaten trades early, especially when you think about Watcher, because if you have a Lookout and a Watcher swinging and their 2 might or whatever might unit is going to 1, your Lookout's just trading, clearing the battlefield. It's not taking the battlefield. And so that's why I feel like having Clockwork Keeper at 2 might is just better. Then we also have Lecturing Yordle. Lecturing Yordle is kind of our turn 2 extra 2 drop to ensure that we get that in there. The Lecturing Yordle is really good because it has tank, so it can be very good for protective holes to protect Ahri Alluring specifically, because you can either buff a bit to soak it up damage in the combat resolution step, or it just creates odd math for them to deal with, and it draws you a card. Now, it doesn't have a lot of might, and I originally started, I think I started with maybe 2 or 3 of these, and I've just slowly phased them out, because what I've realized over time is that whenever I go to sideboard, they're the first things that go out. And so I've kind of thought to myself, like, okay, if I'm just sideboarding these out and I feel good on my other units that I have on the deck, then I think that I'm just okay, probably running just 1 or so. And so I just kind of landed on 1, and it felt pretty good through the tournament. I never felt like I was, oh man, I wish I had a second one, or I didn't see it enough. So that's what it was. Now, Sprite Mother, this is kind of maybe an interesting divergence. I feel like a lot of players and folks and deck builders are running 2. I'm running 3. The reason I like Sprite Mother, and I think kind of the other contention for the slot for an Ahri deck might be Sona. The reason I like Sprite Mother is into more matchups, it is better. So against anything that wants to play slow, or wants to play slow like Aurora, or wants to ramp like Aurora, this is better because it can be aggressive. It also can give you aggression when you need it to surprise your opponent, especially when we look at opponents like Kai'Sa, that, you know, again, that 3 might unit is going to be really awkward for them to get rid of. When you look at things, you know, like Kai'Sa Survivor again, trying to come in, or you like just, you put it on Trifarian War Camp and now it's out of Hex Tech range. There's just a lot of really good things about that sprite that, yes, it can't hold, but it will draw out stuff for your opponent. And then behind it, you have another 3 might unit. So 4 and 1 power for basically functionally 6 might and 3 that's on demand right when you cast it is really, really good in my opinion. And I have found in the general game flow that's been going on, it also helps you potentially catch up if you're going second, to have that 5 rune turn 2. You can strike and have 1 rune as backup for a combat trick, for a defy, for a retreat, something else to kind of protect yourself and protect your board state, or help you get over the line and clear them out and put them on the back foot. So I really like that. Plus, it's really good when you're at that 12 rune end game. There is a potential that if they've cleared your board and you have nothing in your board, and let's say you need to double cap to win, because if you just Watcher, they're going to Watcher you back and potentially have a win. With 12 runes, you can cast the Sprite Mother and you can cast an accelerated Thousand Tail Watcher, and the Sprite and the Watcher can go in and double accelerate you into a win. So I just think the Sprite Mother is really, really good. Could I be convinced to go down to 2? Sure. But do I want to see it in certain matchups? So I'd rather start with 3? Yes. And so I think that Sprite Mother is just a really good card, at least currently in how I've been playing the deck in my testing. Now, Thousand Tailed Watcher, this is a 7 energy, 1 power unit that you can accelerate in. This is one of the best, if not, you know, as far as the unit goes, it's definitely one of the best closers in the game. It itself just enables a ton of things. When you play it, it gives -3 might to all your opponent's units. And it's why it's a $40 card, because your opponent's always gonna have to play around it. When they see you pay 8 and you recycle 2 mind runes, they know the Watcher's coming. You could have back-to-back Watchers is tough for your opponent to deal with. If you play 1, even though you deramp 2 runes, you're going to get 2 runes on the next turn, and you'll be able to probably play another one. And that can weigh down any kind of hold that they have, especially if they have a multi-unit hold. I think that this card is just, it's just gas. So you run 3 of them, you don't look back, and you have it as a finisher. And then last but not least, we have Tasty Feyfolk. I've bounced in and out of having 2 or 3 of these. I have 2 in this current iteration of the deck. It felt good. When you get it, especially if you can get to trade with something, if they hold on the crackback, getting rid of this just it's one of those things that like when you lose it, it feels good. So you can slow play it without losing any power. So Watcher, you could slow play a Watcher, but you're kind of losing out the swinging body, and but it will cost you a power to play a Watcher. However, with Tasty Fey Folk, you can slow play it. You can play it right to a battlefield to hold the battlefield, take no D ramp, or you can accelerate it and pay that one calm rune and still just kind of a slight little speed bump. You know, you're going to lose one rune on your next turn essentially. And if it does die though, then it channels you 2 runes and you draw a card. So it's one of those cards that just like feels good. It feels good to play. It feels good when it gets destroyed. Like it's just a good card. And again, it adds to the draw that is abundant throughout this deck. You have so many cards that draw cards between the cards themselves, between your battlefields, and it's just good. And so overall, I feel like this is a unit package and spell package that just lets you answer a lot of threats, lets you create a lot of threats, close out games, and it's just a core solid starting deck with surprises. Like again, Rune Prison, Windwall, Charm, all surprises in an opening game 1 that won me a lot of game 1s, even into really tough, what should be really tough scenarios, like Arena's Greatest, like Annie or Darius, where I'm winning game 1 because you know these spells just come out in clutch moments and get you over the line. Now, let's talk about the sideboard. So the sideboard is definitely a piece of this deck that definitely I would probably change the most. So I have smoke screen here. This is again kind of anti-watcher tech, anti-big unit tech, but I would probably have this be a Rune Prison instead. But it is in there. That was my kind of solution. I had to just extra in my deck box. I brought a bunch of extra cards. Ahri Inquisitive. So if I really feel like Ahri Alluring just like isn't doing it and I want to switch it up for a game in a good matchup where they don't have a lot of direct removal, then this is a card that I will definitely look at playing. Windwall for when I know that they have clutch spells that I want to stop, those time bulbs, Cathian Rains, that kind of thing. And then Adaptatron, this is purely anti-Aurora tech, anti-baited hook tech. You can throw, I don't know if I'd run 3 again. I feel like 3 is like you make sure you get it on curve, which is kind of why I felt like I wanted to run 3. And it mostly worked out pretty well. Basically just get it out there, and then they're either not playing Aurora because they know it's going to instantly die to Adaptatron. The main thing you have to keep in mind if you run Adaptatron and you play it and then you get it out against Aurora player is you have to make sure that you're not holding both battlefields, because if you're holding both battlefields, then they just play Aurora, and then and then you have to back off your battlefields after whatever comes out, hopefully not Deadbone Predator, and then you have to recapture, and you have to recapture into a big unit, then that kind of sucks. So usually what you want to do is the turn before the Aurora would be cast or is going to be on the way, you just need to just take off of one battlefield, 1 so Deadbloom can't go in there, but 2 also so that you have something to easily capture in order to just destroy their Aurora if they do decide to play it. And it's just really good in that sense of just kind of creating this threat that makes the Aurora player uncomfortable, like they can't just like slam it down. Now, next up we also have Singularity. This is just a good removal card for mid-range decks, for decks where you know they have like a VIP unit. I feel like Charm also already kind of solves this. Like if you're going into a Victor and you can pull the Victor out, although they should be running retreats and trying to protect the Victor that way, but Singularity can do that. It can also be a good swing into Kaisa decks. Be wary of using Singularity against decks like Set or something like that, because Unyielding will just absolutely rock you. However, the one caveat I will say is that if it's coming out of your sideboard and they're not expecting it, they're probably not citing in the Unyieldings against an Ahri, so it can be a good surprise play. So just kind of like know your matchup, pay attention to your matchup and what they're sideboarding in to kind of get an idea of like what you want to do there. And then next up, we have Unchecked Power. Unchecked Power for me is a card that really I have in there for the big stack up Darius decks, for the Victor decks, like anything that's going to really stack a battlefield with big units, that kind of thing. However, the problem is like against E, they can also have Unyielding for your Unchecked Power, which is a big sad moment if that actually does come to fruition, along with Windwalls or something else. And the fact that it exhausts all your friendly units, again, it's another card that if you have Sprite Mother is really good, because Sprite Mother, you know, theoretically, if you have enough energy, enough runes, you can play this and then play Sprite Mother and still be able to capture a battlefield and get there. So it's a card that honestly, because I never played a Victor player, like I never really saw it or never really came into play, but it's just a good kind of tech card to have there in your back pocket. Now, something I want to talk a little bit through is a thing that I see missing from a lot of these kind of videos is when you play your opponent, you usually are going to play a best of 3. So what should you expect that they are going to side in against your deck? And I'm going to kind of walk through the things to expect so you can be better at hand reading in game 2 and game 3 and so on. So if you were playing a mind deck, you should expect that they are going to side in smoke screens. Now, a lot of the things they're going to be sided against you are specifically because you were playing Thousand-Tailed Watcher. And because it is so meta defining of a card and a closer, a lot of stuff is built around Thousand-Tailed Watcher. So Smokescreen is meant for Thousand-Tailed Watcher, so that when you play your Thousand-Tailed Watcher and you head into their Thousand-Tailed Watcher, for example, and their Thousand-Tailed Watcher is now at 4, they smokescreen yours, now yours is at 3, and they win that combat, theoretically. And so that's kind of why that card is there. So if you're playing against any mind decks, expect that they will probably side in smokescreen, and that you need to play around that or look at their runes and think in your head and use that in your calculations and sequencing of how you solve a round. The next up is, let's say you're playing against order decks. You're playing against order decks, you are going to have to look out for Shen. And the reason you're gonna have to look out for Shen is, again, Watcher, because when you swing in with Watcher, or when you cast Watcher, it's going to -3 everything that's in play. Shen on a defensive play can pop in, you know, as Shen likes to do. So basically, it can be played to a battlefield as a reaction, and Shen will have 3 power. He'll have none of the debuff because he wasn't there at the time that you cast your Watcher, and he has Shield 2, which will put him to 5 power. And on top of that, he has tank, which means that all the damage from your Watcher has to go into the Shen. And usually that means that whatever you wanted to remove from that battlefield is probably not going to get removed. And the Shen will get removed, but that's a great thing to trade for shutting down a Watcher and killing the Watcher in the process. So if you're playing against an order deck and they have 3 and an order rune available, you need to watch out for the Shen play and have that again in your calculations, in your sequencing when you're going in to fight an order deck. Now, if you're playing against a Fury deck, there are a few cards that you might see. Bryn here, Thundersong. This card basically says if they play it on their turn, it costs 6 energy and it's a 5 might. But when it's played, your opponent can't play cards, which means that if, you know, part of the strength of being an Ahri player is you have a bunch of runes up, they have to make a lot of hard decisions about what is potentially in your hand that is going to mess them up. This card basically turns you off, and if they can solve the puzzle with you without you playing anything, it's basically counts like you're tapped out. So watch out for this card, because it's a unit, you can't respond to it. Like if this was a spell, you could play a bunch of reactions or something like that before it came into play. But because he's just coming into play, it's you're kind of hosed there. So this is a card that will shut you down. So you just have to be aware that this might be sided in and just shut down your ability to respond, and that beautiful like combat tricks that you're going to play to survive just isn't going to happen anymore. Now, another card that you might just run into more of is Annie's might side in another Falling Star to deal with you, mainly just because they want to slow down your early game and just really take over. And if they see you windwalling them, then they'll probably be like, well, you know, like it's not going to windwall the second one, and you know, maybe that's the difference. And so I've just seen a few times that Falling Star will make it in its way, and sometimes that those will ramp up because taking out your 2 drops, Falling Star is just really good at shutting down Ahri's tempo if it gets to connect. So when you play against any Fury deck in general, between Annie, between Kaisa, even Darius, I would just kind of have your in the back of your head is like, okay, I need to have a retreat. I need to have a buff spell, something that if they Falling Star, I'm not going to get completely blown out. And then from there, I think the other thing to just keep an eye on is Aurora, and mainly in Master Yi decks, because what will happen in Master Yi decks, or at least what we saw at Houston Regionals, is there's a lot of decks that will have tech that either they start as a Yi Aurora deck, or they have a Aurora in the back. And so they're basically trying to fake you out between game 1 and game 2 of what's going to happen, and they make it difficult. So like if you're against a Yi Aurora and, you know, I go and I start to side in my Adaptatrons and they side out their, you know, their Auroras, and they bring in like a mid-range build or a ramp build, then my Adaptatrons are worthless. The key thing if you're ever playing as a Yi player is after the first game is you basically have to pay attention to, are they sideboarding? Are they sideboarding? What are they sideboarding? Try to look at how many cards they're sideboarding. Like all that stuff is very important information, like a very small thing that will let you know, like, hey, if there's a bunch of cards being sided out, there's a deck transformation happening here. Maybe I shouldn't put in my Adaptatrons. Maybe I shouldn't overreact. The fortunate thing for Ahri, I think, is that Ahri is pretty good into Yeet, or at least in the games I played over the weekend, I felt really good into Yeet. So I think that that's okay. But again, every little thing helps you, especially in a long tournament like this against really good players. And so these are tricks that you just want to look out for if you're an Ahri player and you're playing in a skirmish, if you're playing in a regional or a big tournament like this. All right, so here is Caleb's deck. This is the best of Ahri deck that he piloted. A lot of similarities throughout this deck, also running the green Ahri, running a lot of the similar spells. He's playing Watchful Sentries. I'm not. I think Sona's a big thing, but I think we can just start from the top here. He has a 5-7 split. Personally, I feel like this probably is not necessary. I think that when we look across the blue and green runes of this deck, yes, you have Time Warp, which is mind rune intensive. Yes, you have Watcher and you have Sprite Mother, but those are your only real mind type of cards. And because of that, you know, maybe if you bring in Dr. Mundo, it'll be better. Maybe that's kind of the answer to the testing that's out there. But I feel like you would be fine if you were 6 and 6. I had no problem 6 and 6. Even if you're thinking about double time warping, if you have 6 mind runes and you're at 12 runes, let's say you're at end game runes, and you cast a time warp with 6 mind runes, then 4 mind runes are going to go into your stack. But then on the time warp turn, you're going to get 2 more mind runes back. You can do the second time warp. There's not a lot of reason, I feel like, to have 7 over 5, especially when a lot of, you know, you have Defy early game potentially. You have a Wind Wall that takes 2 in slow cost. You have Sona that you want to get off. And only having 5 runes actually makes it potentially more likely that you might have some weird only mind rune by turn 2 draw. And so I'd rather just go 6 and 6 and keep this clean, personally, because I don't. And I think that it's boring to say that. And I think it's like we always want to kind of like, ooh la la, you know, put like tinker a little bit, but I feel like this is like over tinkering for what we have to do. But it maybe, you know, maybe there's a world where it's like, hey, I sided Mundo, I sided Ahri. Now my blue is pushed far enough that I need to make sure that no matter what, I have a blue rune for Ahri or Sprite Mother. I don't know. Again, I would have to ask him why he ended up landing on this, but I think you could get away with 6 and 6 and be fine. Now he decided to run Aspirant's Climb. I don't run Aspirant's Climb. I've seen that in a lot of Ahri decks because they are late game or have a lot of power late game and have a lot of tools, especially with green Ahri, to jump points and potentially win in that spot. My problem is that I know that he also had tough matchups into Kaisa, and I would rather bring a battlefield like Terraferin War Camp that helps me into the Kaisa matchup, because that's where I think that Ahri needs to focus in order to get through the field. I feel like Aspirant's Climb doesn't quite get us there, because I think that Kaisa also has Time Warp and things that can help her close out games and be really efficient and have card draw to match you. And Aspirant's Climb doesn't quite get us there. And the other fear that I have is, let's say you're playing Aspirant's Climb into an MF Aurora deck, or you're playing Aspirant's Climb into a Yi Aurora deck. That is also a scary place to be, especially if you get double Aspirants and you're playing to 10 against an Aurora deck. It's going to be really hard for Ahri to pull out of that, especially when, you know, you're going to really have to rely on these Rune Prisons and Charms, and I don't even know if that would be enough in those kind of scenarios. So I think that Aspirant's Climb for me, and what I think needs to be around the field, is probably not what I would have ran. I think I actually, you know, maybe it won him games in other matchups, but we'll see. I mean, I would love to chat with him about his deck and how he landed on these choices, because I think that they are unique to him, and I think that, like, we all have different perspective on the game and different experience with the game. So love to see what landed him here and how it actually worked out for him in the tournament. I can only speak from my perspective of how I see the field and the Ahri deck. So other things, again, we talked a little bit about the Watchful Sentries, why I like them, why I don't play mine. He's going 3 on guard, and then he's running Sona. So Sona's the real big divergence. And Sona is a tough topic because Sona is very powerful. Sona, there are a bunch of lines where, you know, you have a 2-drop, it takes a battlefield, you place Sona onto the battlefield, you untap 4, and they now have this nightmare of, how do I get you off of this? Because You're gonna have combat tricks, you're gonna have defies, you're gonna have stuff there. My problem is that Sona, even when you untap the runes, you gotta have it. Like, you gotta have the backup to stop what's about to come. And the other problem is that she's really bad into Kaisa. So if you have a field where you're like, hey, there's gonna be, 30+% Kaisa players, or there's going to be, in this case, I think, if you add in Annie, you're almost getting towards like 50% of a field that is running Falling Stars. Like, Sona is in a lot of trouble because yes, you could maybe you have the wind wall, but let's just play this out. Like, let's say that turn 2 or 3 you do this. Like, so let's say you get the 2. So worst case scenario, you 2-drop in, you Sona in, you untap your 3 runes because you had to recycle 1 to play Sona. Now you have to have a retreat to save the Sona, but you're going to be completely, lose kind of progress there. But you have to have either a retreat for Sona. If you wind wall, that's bad because you wind wall, but now you're going down to 1 rune on turn after your second turn. So turn 3, you're gonna have, you're gonna have 3 runes, or it's just, or you have to have some combination of buff spells. Which again, if you had like Trifarian, let's say, and you're slapping down onto Trifarian with the Sona, now she's at 5. Now like one discipline gets you over that line to survive the Falling Star. I like that a lot better. But I think that Sona just is kind of one of those things where it commits you to a play style that feels like strong. Like this should be strong. However, I feel like in practice, by getting pigeonholed, if it gets broken, the game plan really falls apart. So I like Sona. I think that it's something that I want to continue to experiment more with to feel how I feel about it, because I think there are matchups where it's good. I just think I would not play it main deck because, again, the goal for this tournament should be I need to get through Kaisas. And Sona is just not great into Kaisa. And I would argue that I would rather play, another 2-drop and just have the runes open for retreats and buffs and bait out, the Falling Star that way than, potentially commit to a play and then have to have a really strong I have to have a strong hand that has the answers to this, or that may have to make me redo the play that I just did to get this Sona into play onto the battlefield. So yeah, it's very interesting. And they got you to do that all off of 2 runes. And so like, it's very interesting. It's a very interesting card that can be super powerful. And I've seen different types of decks where, their whole theory is you like run Sona and then you run a ton of like combat tricks and other stuff to back her up and like really keep her alive and just run the entire game out of that. But I just feel like it's so pot committed that I don't like that. I would rather have a deck that's flexible in my game plan so that I can have different game plans based on what I'm playing. And I feel like Sona just commits me. And so I don't like the pot committal. I don't like the pot committal. And yeah, we'll see. So sideboard, 2 charms. Again, told you why I love charm. Look, sideboard makes sense. Rune Prison, same thing. Would have ran 2 Rune Prisons. Ahri Inquisitive, also would have ran that. Dr. Mundo, this is going to be good into Kaisa matchup because it's so big that you can't really deal with it later in the game. You can also match, a team. Well, it probably, it'll be close to matching a Teemo, Dr. Mundo potentially, maybe. I don't know. But it can just be a big unit that helps you solve the big unit matchups. So that's why Mundo's here. The main issue with Mundo in an Ahri deck is that it's a good for like a hold unit to like capitalize and like for sure hold something into like a time warp. Maybe if you can re-ramp, I guess. I don't know. It's tough, but it's it's a hold unit that can potentially, if you can time warp on the next time you're starting from like 10 runes, let's say, it can get you there, and it can also hold really well. But I feel like as an attacking unit, you have to develop it. It doesn't have accelerate. Like most of the time in most of the games, you probably want to watch her instead. So very specific matchups, Dr. Mundo could be decent. Foxfire is interesting. Foxfire is really good into the Ahri mirror. I have felt more and more like it's a card that I probably would slot into my sideboard as well. And it's also good into token decks like Victor, into Darius also ends up running a lot of tokens in his deck. So I think it's a decent card. I just didn't run it for this event because I felt like I had other things in my deck that also solve this. The other thing about Foxfire that you have to be aware of is that because Ahri runs like no other hidden cards, like if you hide a card on a battle, if you hide this on a battlefield, they know it's Foxfire, like 1,000,000%. In conjunction with Ahri Inquisitive, also reducing power, really, really powerful. And the Ahri passive, really powerful because it lowers everything's power. But I feel like if you play this face down, they know 100% what it is. It's not Consult the Past. Although it'd be interesting to mix them up with that. But you know it's going to be a Foxfire more than likely. And it's a card that I want to play more with and experiment more with. Mystic Reversal, I kind of already shared a little bit of my thoughts on this, but basically my feeling is that if I Wind Wall a Time Warp or an Acathian Rain, that is a game-winning play. I don't need to then win more by taking that turn or to be able to Acathian Rain their units or something. I think that can still be good. Like, obviously that's an amazing play, but the amount of times 4 just kind of feels awkward to have open and to not utilize in a turn to like maximize rune usage, and you deramp 3. Like, again, I feel like if I just have 3 open and 2, then I'm good. Then I Wind Wall the Time Warp. They wasted their entire turn. Great. Acathian Rain, they wasted their entire turn and burned, 2 runes if you're Kai'Sa. Great. Like, I feel like it's good enough to just have the Wind Wall than to have Mystic Reversal. And just in my experience, just like Wind Wall gets you over the line most of the time. So that's why I don't even bother with Mystic Reversal anymore. But it is a cool, like, as a play, is a really cool play to think of to be able to Time Warp off of them and potentially swing a game. I can see it being played, but again, just in my practice, just the Wind Wall gets you there. With all that said, that's the main differences, and I would love to pick Caleb's brain. I've reached out to him to hopefully get an interview, but if he wants to do it, if he doesn't want to do it, but if he doesn't want to do it, I'd really love to chat with him, because I think that again, I talked to a lot of players. I've seen a lot of different versions of Ahri decks in my time, kind of landing on what works for me and what I play. And so it's always cool to see what are the decisions they're making, why are they making them, and yeah, kind of reflect it back. So with all that said, let's wrap this baby up. All right, to wrap this all up, I think that Ahri is actually in a sneaky good position for the current meta. My version of the deck, I took on 7 different legends over the 9 rounds. I only doubled up against Annie and Kai'Sa twice. Those were my only duplicates. I felt favored into Yi. I felt really good into Yi throughout the weekend, the pre-day and the main tournament that I went through. The single Yi that I matched up against, it was like a very easy, breezy, beautiful 2-0, And then I felt good into Annie, which was good considering she took the overall thing. So if I feel good into Yi and Annie, and those were the 2 main, legends making the top runs, then I feel like Ahri can be positioned. I think the gap is that I felt bad into Kai'Sa, and I felt bad into Kai'Sa, I think, because of my prep. So I made the first Kai'Sa I played, I had the win and I made a misplay and threw. Basically the sequencing of how I attacked in with my units, I was so focused on clearing their Watcher that I focused on that first instead of playing to the smaller unit first with one of my smaller units to bait out the smoke screen that I knew he had in his hand. Instead, he just didn't use the smoke screen, of course, on the big unit attack, and just used it on the little one to trade me out so I couldn't finish and win the game then and there. And then Time Warp shenanigans ensued. So lesson learned of that part of it. But I think also it's important that I played against a lot of Kai'Sa decks, like locally, and some other people. But the problem that I found with Riftbound specifically is that Riftbound is a game where the pilot is a lot of the power of the deck. There's a lot of, like, yes, your deck has to be built competitive, and the more you build the deck to fight the meta or deal with the meta that you expect, and that answer is correct, the other littler advantages you get. But because this game is so built off of, like, every little mistake loses you the game, I think that piloting matters way, way, way more than the actual physical deck. And we saw a lot of, at the highest level, at the highest tables, there were decks that a lot of people think wouldn't get there. And, obviously they lost against other really high level players that were piloting their decks to their max. But I think that is the difference. And so I feel like in my prep for Houston, I played Kai'Sa matchups and I was doing well enough that I was like, oh, like, I feel pretty good about this. And then when I ran up against a really good Kai'Sa player in the 9th round, and Ryan Miles, who topped 4 at the Vegas tournament that happened there, like, I very quickly, I was like, oh, like, there's a gap. in my gameplay and my knowledge. And so I feel like if I had to go to another regional again, I think again I would find strong Kaisa partners and get as many reps against them as possible to really get me honed on that, because I feel like those were winnable. And if I can bridge that gap, then I'm now in top cut. I had one mistake against, I had an OT shenanigans against a Darius player, ended up losing that game to basically the way the turns were set up. If I had ended my turn earlier so that I was not turn 0, I would have won that game because I had green Ahri that was going to ramp me ahead of him. Let's say Livy. So I think, yeah, it's really important. I think in when you're preparing for a tournament is make sure that you find other good players of decks. So if you have like a one trick player at your local Nexus Nights at your skirmishes is really good at a certain legend, like show up early, get games against them, swap decks with them so you get to play the other side. Hit them up on their Discord and get more reps in with them, because I think had I gone back, that is something that definitely would have helped me get over the line, help me be more prepped, and maybe even would have tweaked my deck a little bit, because I did what I thought was working was good. But better players will do better things against you and play better lines, and you will quickly find out that maybe some of the lines that are working for you against not as good of pilots aren't as good. So anyways, I hope this deck tech was helpful for you. If you have any questions, if there's any other concepts you want me to show off, if you want me to show off some more gameplay or there's interest in that, hit me up down in the comments. I'd love to answer questions, would love to share my thoughts about other cards that may be included, discluded. I'm definitely going to do something on Spirit Forged upgrades for the Ahri deck, because I think cards like Thwonka are immediate replacements for Rune Prison that don't cost you energy, that are going to be amazing. And so with all this said, again, I'll be interviewing some players coming up. I will be creating more content and videos. So like, subscribe, and as always, remember, you're going to be amazing today because you are amazing. And I'll catch you next episode.